Have you ever found yourself frozen mid-conversation, your mind frantically searching for the right words? That moment when your thoughts are flowing in your native language, but you're desperately trying to translate them into English. Your heart races as the silence grows longer, and you can feel your confidence shrinking with each passing second. I've been there. My students have been there. And if you're learning English, chances are you've been there too. But what if I told you there's a way to break free from this translation trap? A method that could transform how you speak English, making your words flow naturally without that frustrating mental barrier. Today, I want to share what I consider the ultimate secret to true English fluency: learning to think in English. My name is Grace, and I've spent over 15 years teaching English to students from around the world. In that time, I've discovered that the single biggest difference between those who achieve remarkable fluency and those who remain stuck isn't grammar knowledge or vocabulary size. It's the ability to think directly in English. When you think in English, you bypass the translation process entirely. Your thoughts form in English from the very beginning, allowing you to speak more quickly, more naturally, and with greater confidence. It's like opening a direct pathway between your thoughts and your words, removing the roadblock of translation that slows so many learners down. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds wonderful, Grace. But how do I actually do it? How do I train my brain to think in a language that isn't my native tongue? That's exactly what we're going to explore today. I'm going to share a 4-stage process that will gradually train your mind to think in English. A method I've used with hundreds of students with remarkable results. This isn't about memorizing more vocabulary lists or drilling more grammar exercises. It's about rewiring how your brain processes language, creating new neural pathways that make English thinking automatic and natural. And the best part, you can practice it anywhere, anytime, without special materials or equipment. All you need is your mind and the world around you. So whether you're just beginning your English journey, or you've been studying for years, but still feel that frustrating translation barrier, this podcast is for you. The ability to think in English is within your reach, and today, I'm going to show you how to achieve it. Let's begin with understanding why thinking in your native language is holding you back. When you rely on translation, you're essentially doing double the mental work. First, you form thoughts in your native language. Then, you have to convert those thoughts into English, searching for equivalent words and reconstructing sentences according to English grammar rules. This process is mentally exhausting and creates a noticeable delay in your speech. Even worse, it often leads to unnatural expressions because languages don't map perfectly onto each other. Certain phrases and concepts that exist in your language might not have exact equivalents in English, and vice versa. I remember working with May, a student from China who had an impressive knowledge of English vocabulary and grammar. She could ace any written test, but when it came to speaking, she would pause frequently, searching for the right words. When I asked about her thought process, she explained that she was thinking in Chinese and then translating into English. This translation step was creating a barrier between her knowledge and her ability to communicate fluidly. After working together on thinking directly in English, the transformation in May's speaking was remarkable. Her responses became quicker, her expressions more natural, and most importantly, her confidence soared. She was no longer trapped in the exhausting cycle of translation. Now, let's dive into the 4-stage process that will help you develop this crucial skill of thinking in English. I've developed this method over many years of teaching, and I've seen it work for students from diverse language backgrounds and at various proficiency levels. Stage 1 is all about thinking in verbs, the action words that drive our language. Verbs are the engines of sentences, telling us what's happening and propelling our thoughts forward. They're also relatively concrete and easy to visualize, making them the perfect starting point for thinking in English. Here's how to practice throughout your day. Simply observe the actions happening around you and name them in English in your mind. If you're at a park, you might notice people walking, running, playing, laughing, or sitting. If you're at a cafe, you might see people drinking, eating, talking, reading, or typing. This might seem overly simple, but it's laying crucial groundwork. You're training your brain to reach directly for English words to describe what you're observing, without first labeling these actions in your native language. Let me give you a more detailed example. Imagine you're at a busy train station. Take a few minutes to observe all the actions around you and name them in English. People are rushing toward their platforms. Someone is checking the departure board. A child is crying. Two friends are hugging goodbye. A man is purchasing a ticket. A woman is dragging a heavy suitcase. By focusing solely on verbs, you're making the task manageable while still building the neural pathways that connect your observations directly to English. I recommend spending at least a week on this stage, practicing for 10 minutes several times a day in different environments. Carlos, a student from Brazil, found this practice transformative. He made it a habit to name actions in English during his morning commute. At first, it felt strange and forced, he told me. But after about 2 weeks, I realized I was automatically thinking of English verbs when I observed actions. I wasn't translating from Portuguese anymore. The English words just came to me. Now, let's move to stage 2, thinking in nouns. Nouns are the names we give to people, places, things, and ideas. Along with verbs, they form the core of our communication. In this stage, you'll focus on identifying and naming objects around you directly in English. The practice is similar to stage 1, but now you're focusing on things rather than actions. Look around you right now. What do you see? Perhaps a table, a chair, a phone, a window, a tree outside, clouds in the sky. Practice naming everything you can see directly in English. To make this practice more engaging, challenge yourself to be specific. Instead of just car, identify a sedan, an SUV, a convertible, or a pickup truck. Instead of just tree, recognize an oak, a pine, a palm, or a maple, or simply a tall tree or flowering tree. If you don't know the specific type, this specificity not only makes the exercise more challenging but also helps expand your vocabulary in useful ways. You're learning words in context, connected to real objects you encounter in your daily life, which makes them easier to remember and use later. Try this practice in different locations to expose yourself to varied vocabulary. Name objects in your kitchen, your office, a supermarket, or a park. Each environment will introduce different categories of nouns. Aisha, a student from Morocco, created a game for herself during this stage. She would select a specific category each day, such as furniture, technology, or food items, and challenge herself to name as many objects in that category as she could find in her surroundings. It turned the practice into something fun rather than a chore, she explained, and I was surprised by how quickly my brain started to think of the English words first. After practicing stages 1 and 2 for a few weeks, you'll have built a strong foundation for thinking in English. You'll have trained your brain to form direct connections between your observations and English words, bypassing your native language for both actions and objects. Now it's time for stage 3, thinking in complete sentences. This is where your practice becomes more complex and more powerful. Instead of just naming individual actions or objects, you'll start describing what's happening around you in full sentences. Begin with simple subject, verb-object sentences. The woman is reading a book. The dog is chasing a ball. The children are playing soccer. These straightforward sentences combine the verbs and nouns you've been practicing in stages 1 and 2. As you become more comfortable, start adding details with adjectives and adverbs. The tall woman is quietly reading a thick book. The excited dog is enthusiastically chasing a red ball. The young children are playing soccer on the green field. Then, move on to more complex sentence structures, incorporating prepositional phrases, relative clauses, or compound sentences. The woman with glasses is reading a book about history while sipping her coffee. The dog that belongs to my neighbor is chasing a ball under the old oak tree. The children are playing soccer, and their parents are watching from the sidelines. The goal here is to describe what you see in increasingly detailed and complex English sentences, all without translating from your native language. You're building on the foundation of verbs and nouns to create more complete and nuanced expressions directly in English. I suggest practicing this stage during specific daily activities. For example, you might describe your morning routine to yourself as you go through it. I'm turning off my alarm. I'm getting out of bed. I'm stretching my arms. I'm walking to the bathroom. I'm brushing my teeth with mint toothpaste. Or describe your commute. I'm waiting at the bus stop. The bus is arriving now. I'm boarding the bus and showing my pass. I'm looking for an empty seat. I'm sitting next to a woman who is listening to music. This practice helps you build fluency with everyday vocabulary and sentences that you're likely to use regularly. It also reinforces the habit of thinking directly in English rather than translating from your native language. Daniel, a student from Spain, found this stage particularly helpful for his workplace communication. He would practice describing his tasks and interactions in English sentences throughout the workday. After a few weeks of this, he shared, "I noticed that in meetings with English-speaking colleagues, I could respond more quickly and naturally. I wasn't mentally translating anymore. I was just speaking." Now we arrive at stage 4, the most advanced level thinking in paragraphs. This is where you bring everything together to create detailed, connected descriptions or narratives entirely in English. Rather than isolated sentences, you're now forming coherent passages that flow logically from one thought to the next. In this stage, practice describing scenes, events, or experiences in multiple connected sentences that form a coherent whole. For example, instead of just noting, "I'm at the beach," or "the ocean is blue," you might think, "I'm sitting on the warm sand, watching the waves roll onto the shore. The ocean stretches out before me, shimmering blue-green in the sunlight. Children are building sandcastles nearby, laughing as the water occasionally reaches their creations. Seagulls circle overhead, occasionally diving down to look for food. The salty breeze feels refreshing on my face after the hot drive here." Notice how this paragraph incorporates verbs, nouns, and sentences into a cohesive description that captures not just isolated elements, but the entire experience. You're not just naming things, you're conveying a complete picture or story. This level of thinking in English is powerful because it mirrors how we naturally think and communicate. Our thoughts don't occur as isolated words or even single sentences. They flow in connected streams that link observations, feelings, and ideas. When you can think in English paragraphs, you're experiencing the language in its most natural form. To practice this stage, try these approaches. Describe your surroundings in detail, including not just what you see but what you hear, smell, feel, and perhaps even taste. Incorporate your impressions and emotions as well as objective observations. Mentally recount events from your day in paragraph form, connecting the sequence of activities with appropriate transitions. Imagine explanations or arguments you might make in English, developing your thoughts in logically connected sentences. Create internal narratives about people you observe, imagining their stories or motivations based on what you can see. This stage takes the most practice, but it's also the most rewarding. When you can think in English paragraphs, you're no longer just naming things in English. You're actually thinking in the language in a meaningful, connected way. Sophie, a French student, described her experience with this stage. "At first, it felt like I was performing, like I was putting on an English, thinking show for myself. But gradually, it became more natural. One day, I realized I had been internally narrating my entire morning in English without even trying. That's when I knew something fundamental had changed in how my brain was processing the language." Now, let's talk about how to incorporate these practices into your daily life effectively. The key to success with this method is consistency. Short, frequent practice sessions are more effective than occasional long ones. Here are some practical suggestions. Start each day with a 5-minute English thinking session. As you get ready in the morning, describe your actions, surroundings, and plans for the day in English. Use transitional moments, like walking between locations, waiting for a bus, or standing in line, as opportunities to practice. These otherwise wasted minutes can become valuable English thinking time. Set specific triggers for practice. For example, you might decide that every time you enter a new room, you'll spend 30 seconds naming objects in that room in English. Use sticky notes to label objects around your home with their English names. This creates a visual environment that reinforces direct connections to English words. Record voice notes to yourself in English, describing what you've been thinking about during your practice sessions. This adds a speaking component that reinforces the thinking patterns you're developing. Use a journal to write down your English thoughts. This adds another modality to your practice and helps solidify the thinking patterns. Find an accountability partner who is also working on thinking in English. Check in with each other regularly to share progress and challenges. Remember that this is a gradual process. You won't suddenly start thinking entirely in English overnight. There will be times when you catch yourself thinking in your native language, and that's completely normal. The goal is to gradually increase the proportion of your thinking that happens directly in English. I want to address some common challenges and questions that arise when practicing thinking in English. What if I don't know a specific word in English? This will happen frequently, especially in the beginning. When you encounter an object or action you can't name in English, you have several options. You can use a more general term saying, flower. If you don't know, daffodil. Describe it, the yellow flower with the trumpet-shaped center. Look it up if practical, or simply make a mental note to learn that word later. The important thing is to stay in English mode as much as possible, working around vocabulary gaps rather than switching back to your native language. Is it normal to feel mentally tired when practicing thinking in English? Absolutely. You're creating new neural pathways, which requires significant mental energy. This fatigue will decrease over time as thinking in English becomes more automatic. Start with short practice sessions and gradually extend them as your English thinking stamina builds. Should I be thinking in English all the time? That's not necessarily the goal, especially at first. Begin with dedicated practice periods, then gradually extend them. Some of my students eventually report thinking predominantly in English, while others maintain a balance between their native language and English. Switching depending on the context. How long before this becomes natural? The timeline varies widely depending on your current proficiency level, how often you practice, and individual factors. Some students report breakthroughs within a few weeks, while for others, the process unfolds over several months. What's important is consistent practice and recognition of your progress, however gradual it may be. Does this replace other forms of English study? Definitely not. Thinking in English complements traditional study methods, it doesn't replace them. You still need to learn grammar, expand your vocabulary, practice speaking and listening, and so on. Thinking in English helps you use what you already know more effectively. But you need to continue building that knowledge base. Now let's explore some specific scenarios where thinking in English can be particularly beneficial. Preparing for conversations or meetings. If you know you'll be speaking English in an upcoming situation, spend some time beforehand thinking through potential topics in English. Imagine questions you might be asked and formulate your responses mentally in English. This primes your brain for English communication and reduces the need for on-the-spot translation, reducing anxiety. Many language learners experience anxiety when speaking English because they're worried about the translation process breaking down. By practicing thinking in English, You build confidence in your ability to form thoughts directly in the language, which can significantly reduce this anxiety. Dreaming in English. As your ability to think in English develops, you might occasionally find yourself dreaming in English. This isn't necessarily a goal to strive for, but many students report it as an exciting milestone that signals deep integration of the language in their minds. Humor and creativity. Some of the most challenging aspects of a language to master are humor, idiomatic expressions, and creative language use. These often don't translate well. By thinking directly in English, you can begin to understand and generate humor and creative expressions that make sense within the patterns of English, rather than trying to translate concepts that may not carry over from your native language. Let's delve deeper into how thinking in English relates to other language skills, starting with speaking. The connection here is direct and powerful. When you can think in English, your speaking becomes more fluid, natural, and confident. Without the thinking skill, here's what typically happens when you speak English. You conceptualize what you want to say in your native language. You mentally translate this into English, searching for equivalent words and appropriate grammar. You then vocalize this translation. This process creates noticeable pauses and often results in unnatural phrasing or word choices. In contrast, when you think directly in English, the path from conception to vocalization is streamlined. You form the thought in English from the start and simply express it. The elimination of the translation step makes your speech faster, more natural, and less mentally taxing. Beyond speed and fluency, thinking in English also improves your pronunciation and intonation. When you think in a language, you often internally hear the words with their proper sounds and rhythms. This internal phonological representation helps guide your actual pronunciation when you speak aloud. Listening comprehension also benefits enormously from developing your English thinking skills. When you think in English, you're essentially practicing with the language's patterns, rhythms, and structures. This familiarity makes it easier to parse and understand spoken English when you hear it. When we listen to our native language, we don't process each individual word separately. We grasp phrases and ideas as cohesive units. Thinking in English helps you develop this same ability, moving from word-by-word processing to more natural, chunk-based understanding. For reading and writing skills, thinking in English creates similar advantages. When you read in a second language but think in your native tongue, you're constantly shuttling between languages, which slows comprehension and creates mental fatigue. By thinking in English while reading English text, you create a seamless experience that enhances both speed and understanding. Writing improves perhaps most dramatically of all. Many language learners compose texts by thinking in their native language and then translating into English, which often results in awkward, unnatural writing. When you think directly in English, your writing flows more naturally and reflects genuine English patterns rather than translated structures from your native language. Now, let's talk about some advanced techniques for those who have mastered the basics of thinking in English. Inner dialogue. Practice having conversations with yourself in English. Pose questions in your mind and answer them. Debate different sides of an issue, or simply narrate your thought process as you make decisions. Emotional thinking. We often revert to our native language for emotional content. Practice forming thoughts about how you feel directly in English. I'm feeling frustrated with this project. I'm excited about the weekend. I'm worried about my presentation tomorrow. Abstract concepts. Move beyond concrete objects and actions to think about abstract ideas in English. Challenge yourself to form thoughts about concepts like freedom, justice, beauty, or happiness. Humor and wordplay. Try to appreciate and create humor in English without translating. Notice plays on words. Catch yourself finding something funny in a specifically English way. Cultural frames. Different languages encode different cultural perspectives. Practice thinking not just in English words but with cultural frames of reference common in English-speaking contexts. Now, let's address the important relationship between language learning and identity as it relates to thinking in English. Some language learners worry that thinking in English might somehow diminish their connection to their native language or cultural identity. This is a valid concern, and it's worth exploring. Learning to think in English doesn't mean erasing or replacing your native language thinking. It means adding another dimension to your cognitive abilities. Rather than diminishing your identity, it enhances it, giving you access to another way of conceptualizing and experiencing the world. Many of my students report that thinking in different languages actually gives them a sense of cognitive flexibility and broader perspective. There are concepts and nuances that exist in English that might not have exact equivalents in your native language, and vice versa. Being able to think in both languages allows you to draw on the unique strengths and insights of each. This is what linguists call additive bilingualism, the idea that adding a new language enriches rather than replaces existing language capabilities. Your goal is to add English thinking to your cognitive toolkit, not to subtract or diminish your native language abilities. Many successful English learners develop what researchers call a bicultural identity, the ability to function comfortably within two cultural and linguistic frameworks. This doesn't mean losing your original identity. It means gaining the flexibility to operate effectively in multiple contexts. Let's now turn to some specific exercises that can help you develop your English thinking skills at each stage. For stage 1, thinking in verbs. Try the action observation. Exercise: spend 5-10 minutes in a public place like a park, cafe, or shopping center. Challenge yourself to identify as many different actions as possible, naming each in English. Aim for variety and specificity. Instead of just walking, notice strolling, rushing, wandering, or strutting. For stage 2, thinking in nouns, try the room inventory exercise. Enter a room and give yourself 2 minutes to name as many objects as possible in that room in English. Make it challenging by being specific and detailed. Then move to another room and repeat. This builds both your noun vocabulary and your ability to retrieve English words quickly. For stage 3, thinking in sentences, try the morning narration exercise. As you go through your morning routine, describe each action in a complete sentence with details. I'm pouring steaming coffee into my favorite blue mug. I'm spreading strawberry jam on my crispy toast. This builds your ability to form detailed sentences automatically. For stage 4, thinking in paragraphs, try the scene description exercise. Choose a location, either where you are or from memory, and describe it in a mental paragraph that includes sensory details, people, actions, and your impressions. Challenge yourself to make the description vivid and cohesive, using connecting words to link your sentences. Another powerful exercise that spans all stages is the language immersion walk. Take a 15-30-minute walk with the sole purpose of thinking in English. Begin by naming actions and objects you see, stages 1 and 2. Then form sentences about what's happening around you, stage 3. Finally, create a mental narrative of your walk, describing what you're observing in connected paragraphs, stage 4. Let's also discuss how technology can support your practice of thinking in English. Voice assistants like Siri, Alexa, or Google Assistant can be valuable tools. Challenge yourself to formulate your requests or questions in English mentally before speaking them. The immediate response from the assistant provides feedback on whether your English thinking was clear and effective. English journaling apps allow you to quickly record thoughts in English throughout your day. Some apps specifically designed for language learners even provide feedback on your writing. Language exchange apps can connect you with English speakers who are learning your native language. Having regular conversations forces you to practice thinking in English during real communication. English media consumption, podcasts, audiobooks, videos, and so on, primes your brain for English thinking. Even passive listening helps attune your mind to English patterns and rhythms. Spaced repetition vocabulary apps can help you build the word base you need for more complex English thinking. Focus on high-frequency words that you're likely to need when thinking about everyday situations. Now, let's explore how your practice of thinking in English might evolve over time. In the beginning stage, typically 1-4 weeks of regular practice, you'll likely experience frequent switching between your native language and English. Your English thinking will feel deliberate and perhaps awkward. You might only be able to sustain it for short periods before mental fatigue sets in. This is completely normal and part of the process. In the intermediate stage, typically 1-3 months of regular practice, you'll notice longer periods of sustained English thinking. The process will feel less effortful, though you'll still encounter vocabulary gaps and occasionally revert to your native language, especially for complex or emotional topics. You might begin to notice spontaneous English thoughts arising, particularly in contexts where you've practiced frequently. In the advanced stage, typically 3-6 months or more of regular practice, thinking in English will begin to feel natural for many topics. You'll find yourself automatically thinking in English in certain contexts without conscious effort. Vocabulary gaps will still occur, but will less frequently disrupt your flow of thought. You might occasionally dream in English or find English words coming to mind more readily than their native language equivalents for certain concepts. In the integrated stage, usually after 6 months of consistent practice, thinking in English becomes second nature in many contexts. You'll likely develop a natural sense of which language works better for particular types of thinking and switch effortlessly between them. Rather than experiencing this as a conscious choice, it will often feel like different contexts or topics naturally evoke thinking in one language or the other. Throughout this evolution, it's important to be patient with yourself and recognize that progress isn't always linear. You might have days where English thinking flows easily, followed by days where it feels more effortful. This fluctuation is normal and doesn't indicate backsliding. It's just part of the natural rhythm of learning. Let's now address how thinking in English can support you in specific real-world situations for job interviews in English. Practicing thinking in English beforehand can dramatically improve your performance, rather than preparing answers in your native language, which you'll then have to translate during the high-pressure interview. Rehearse your thoughts directly in English. This reduces cognitive load during the interview itself, allowing you to focus on making a good impression rather than struggling with translation. For academic study in English speaking environments, thinking in English while reading textbooks and attending lectures helps you process information more efficiently. Many international students struggle because they're constantly translating between languages, which taxes working memory and reduces comprehension. Thinking directly in English while studying allows you to devote more cognitive resources to understanding the material itself. For business negotiations or professional contexts, thinking in English allows you to respond more quickly and confidently. In these high-stakes situations, the pauses and hesitations that come with translation can be interpreted as uncertainty or lack of knowledge, even if you're simply searching for the right English words. Thinking directly in English helps you project confidence and competence. For social situations with English speakers, thinking in English helps you participate more actively in fast-moving conversations. Group discussions or casual social banter often move quickly, with little time for mental translation. Being able to think in English allows you to keep up with the natural flow and contribute more spontaneously. For travel in English-speaking countries, thinking in English helps you navigate unfamiliar situations more effectively. When dealing with unexpected challenges, like transportation issues, health concerns, or logistical problems, the ability to think clearly in English reduces stress and improves your problem-solving capabilities. Let's now turn to how different learning styles might approach the practice of thinking in English. Visual learners might benefit from creating mind maps of English vocabulary grouped by context or topic, then practicing thinking with these words. They might also find it helpful to visualize scenes or situations vividly while describing them in English thoughts. Auditory learners often find it beneficial to subvocalize, silently say their English thoughts, essentially hearing the language in their mind. They might also benefit from recording themselves speaking their English thoughts aloud, then listening back to reinforce the patterns. Kinesthetic learners might connect physical movements to their English thinking practice, perhaps walking while forming English thoughts, using hand gestures to emphasize mental sentences, or physically touching objects while naming them in English. Reading-writing learners often benefit from journaling their English thoughts. The process of writing helps solidify the thinking patterns, and reviewing previous entries shows progress over time. Social learners might prefer to practice thinking in English within conversation groups, perhaps sharing the thought processes they're developing and getting feedback from others on the same journey. Solitary learners often excel at the individual mental practice that thinking in English requires, creating structured personal practice routines that fit their specific needs. Of course, most people use a combination of these learning styles, and you can adapt your practice accordingly. The key is finding approaches that resonate with your personal learning preferences while still challenging you to grow. Let's now explore how thinking in English connects to the deeper aspects of language mastery. Beyond just communication to true expression, language isn't simply a code for transmitting information. It's a lens through which we perceive and interpret the world. Different languages carve up reality in different ways, emphasizing certain distinctions while blurring others. As you develop the ability to think in English, you're not just learning new labels for familiar concepts, you're gaining access to a somewhat different way of conceptualizing experience. Consider how English represents time through its tense system, which differs from many other languages. As you begin thinking in English tenses, you might notice subtle shifts in how you conceptualize temporal relationships. Or consider how English often emphasizes agency through its sentence structure, typically requiring explicit subjects performing actions. This differs from languages that more readily allow subject, less sentences, or emphasize the action over the actor. These structural differences mean that thinking in English isn't just about efficiency in communication. It's about accessing another perspective on reality. Many bilingual people report that they feel slightly different aspects of their personality emerge when thinking and speaking in different languages. This isn't because the language changes who they are, but because each language facilitates the expression of different facets of their complex identity. This deeper dimension of language learning, beyond mere utility to genuine self-expression, emerges most fully when you can think directly in the language. It's the difference between using English as a tool and inhabiting it as a mode of being. As you continue your journey of learning to think in English, I encourage you to remain curious about these deeper dimensions. Notice not just how your communication becomes more efficient, but how your perspective might subtly shift when you're thinking in English. This awareness adds richness to the learning process and connects language acquisition to personal growth. Now, let's address some common myths and misconceptions about thinking in English. Myth 1T. You need to be at an advanced level before you can start thinking in English. This simply isn't true. You can begin practicing with whatever vocabulary and grammar you currently have, even if it's very basic. In fact, developing the thinking habit early in your learning journey can prevent the entrenchment of translation patterns that are harder to break later. Myth 20A. Thinking in English means you'll lose proficiency in your native language. As we discussed earlier, learning to think in another language is an additive process, not a subtractive one. You're expanding your cognitive capabilities, not replacing existing ones. Myth 3. You should aim to think in English 100% of the time. This isn't a realistic or necessary goal. Even highly proficient bilinguals often find that certain topics or contexts naturally evoke thinking in one language or the other. The goal is to develop the ability to think in English when it's beneficial, not to eliminate thinking in your native language. Myth 40. If you still make grammar mistakes while speaking, it means you're not really thinking in English. This misconception confuses perfect mastery with the thinking process. You can be thinking directly in English while still making errors, just as native speakers sometimes make grammatical slips despite obviously thinking in their native language. Myth 50. Thinking in English will feel like a sudden, dramatic shift. For most learners, the development of English thinking is gradual, with the proportion of English thinking increasing over time rather than experiencing a single, breakthrough moment where everything changes. You might not even notice the transition until you realize you've been thinking in English for some time without conscious effort. As we approach the end of our exploration, I want to leave you with some final reflections and encouragement for your journey toward thinking in English. Learning to think in a new language is one of the most profound cognitive shifts you can experience. It's challenging, certainly, but also deeply rewarding. Beyond the practical benefits for your English fluency, it offers a unique perspective on how language shapes thought and how flexible our minds truly are. The 4 stages we've explored, thinking in verbs, nouns, sentences, and paragraphs, provide a structured path, but your personal journey will be unique. Some stages might come more easily than others. You might find yourself moving back and forth between stages depending on the context or your energy level on a given day. This natural variation is part of the process. Remember that developing the ability to think in English is not an all or nothing achievement, but a continuum of progress. Celebrate small victories. The first time you realize you've been thinking in English without conscious effort, the moment you find yourself mentally responding in English to something you hear, the day you notice you're no longer translating in a particular context. Be patient with the process and compassionate with yourself when challenges arise. Some days, English thinking will flow easily. Other days, you might struggle to find even basic words. This fluctuation doesn't reflect your true progress. It's simply part of how our brains work, especially when developing new skills. The practice of thinking in English is something you can return to throughout your life, even as your proficiency grows. Advanced speakers, and even those approaching near native fluency, still benefit from consciously directing their thoughts in English, particularly in challenging or specialized contexts, and perhaps most importantly, try to find joy in the process. Thinking in a new language is not just a utilitarian skill, it's an adventure in perception, a journey into another way of encoding and experiencing the world. Approach it with curiosity and playfulness, rather than seeing it solely as a task to master. As you continue developing your ability to think in English, you're joining millions of others around the world who navigate between multiple languages in their minds each day. This cognitive flexibility is a remarkable human capability, one that connects us across linguistic and cultural boundaries while enriching our individual experience. In closing, I want to thank you for joining me on this exploration of how to think in English. I hope the strategies and insights I've shared will support you in your language learning journey. Remember that each small practice session is building neural pathways that will eventually transform how you experience and use English. If you found this podcast helpful, I'd love to hear about your experiences with thinking in English. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more language learning content, and share your thoughts or questions in the comments below. Your insights might help others on the same journey, and I always enjoy hearing about your unique experiences with language learning. Until next time, happy thinking in English!